person who's struggling to pay energy bills, and also is dealing with blackouts, which have an economic and a health cost. Rooftop solar is like the only solution. It's the only solution that has worked to help people lower their energy bills. What's cool about the statistics I was talking about is this isn't just a wealthy people thing anymore. We have 100,000 members. A lot of them are retirees on fixed incomes. A lot of them are working class people, single mothers, the whole gamut. And so you have that. And there's been no other, the grid, the current electricity system has failed as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't mean that you get rid of it, but lots and lots of rooftop solar can make that system better. Another reason is blackouts. This is our new reality, is that every year we're either going to be dealing with blackouts, massive blackouts, or these like flex alert weeks where basically you can't turn your AC on because everything is going to go sideways. And the only solution to that is solar and a battery. So batteries is kind of a nascent technology, but there were 100,000 solar paired batteries on the grid during the big flex alert week that we had, and they like totally delivered. If we didn't have that on the grid, we would have gone into blackout territory. So it's the only real solution to blackouts is to get more of our, households and churches and also communities, entire communities wired with solar and a battery. And then there's climate change. The state itself says, here's what the state is trying to do, is in basically 15 years, the state is trying to get completely off fossil fuels. So just think about it right now. Like every car that we drive, right? Every furnace or AC that's powered by natural gas, all of it. In 15 years, the state's goal is to basically have that run on electricity, clean electricity from wind and solar. So we're basically going to stop burning everything that we're burning right now. And we're going to take all of that electricity, all of those massive, like just gigawatts of electricity, and we're going to stuff it through the lines of PG&E, SDG&E, and SoCal Edison. Well, okay, that's pretty daunting, and we have to do it. And the state itself says that in order to do that, we're going to need so much more renewable energy than we have today. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling. It's a little bit like trying to ponder the universe, how much more renewable energy that we need. And it's everything. Like there's not one thing, but one of the things that the state itself says that we need to do is we need to triple the amount of rooftop solar of what we have today. It's one of the legs of the stool. We have to triple it. So we have to triple the amount of rooftop solar that we have. We have to triple the solar farms too, and we have to triple the wind farms. We have to triple all of it. So you have to keep it growing for that reason alone. Okay, so that's where we sat. So we were like, okay, if we're going to do anything, we should be working to just supercharge rooftop solar. 1.5 million solar rooftops is nice, but it's kind of chump change. We need to be thinking like 10 million solar rooftops, of which 5 million of them are powered with have a battery next to them. That'd be, if we were running the state, that's what we'd be saying we got to do. And that's the case that we made for 2 years. Instead, what we ended up having to do for the last 2 years was fight off a utility attack that was trying to just burn the entire thing to the ground. And when I say burn it all to the ground, I mean the whole thing to the ground. The original thing that the utilities were pushing for, and the original proposal that the California Public Utilities Commission put out a year from around today, a year ago, the original proposal would have literally have done that. It would have first off, it would have made retroactive changes on the 1.5 million existing solar users. So it wouldn't have just been prospective, it would have been retroactive. It would have included a $700 a year solar tax. So literally just a tax just for putting the solar panels on your roof, like a cigarette tax. Like you put it on your roof, and the tax, the more solar energy that your panels produced, the higher your tax would be. That was literally a proposal coming out of our government. So that was one part of it. And then the other part of it was to drastically shrink down the credit, the compensation that solar users get for sharing their extra solar energy with the grid. Right now, it's about to change, but right now the way it works is if you make extra solar energy, the utility takes it, they sell it to your neighbor, and then they credit you for the same price, more or less, as what they sell it to your neighbor. Kind of makes sense. The utility didn't pay a dime to make that energy, so it's just a one-to-one swap. What the proposal, and this is part of what the original proposal was, to shrink that credit down by 80%. So that was the original thing. It would have burnt it to the ground. It would have, you know, taken the credit and shrunk it down, the compensation for extra solar energy down by 80%. On top of that, a solar tax of $700 a year. And this would have been both retroactive and prospective. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but that's what was on the table. So the public organized for more than a year. It organized in a really, really big way. And I don't know this for certain, but I've been told by people who know a thing or two about this, this ended up being one of the largest grassroots campaigns that California has seen in recent years. Nearly 200,000 people got involved in some way, shape, or form, making an official public comment to the CPUC, calling someone, someone in the government, you know, to the extent that we were able to track this, to testify before the CPUC, either over the phone or in person, to march in the streets. There were multi-thousand people rallies all over the state. There were rallies in 10 cities, you know, twice. And then in several cities, there were multiple ones with like just thousands of people. Most major newspapers came down on our side. And then notably, and you know this because you had a front row seat to this, there were more than 600 nonprofit organizations and cities and school districts and businesses and elected officials and members of Congress who all aligned around the idea that, like, don't do that. We should keep rooftop solar growing. The last thing we ought to be doing is sending it backwards. It was an enormous show of unity. The public opinion polls were astonishing, always consistently in our favor, despite the messaging that was coming out of the utilities. And it really penetrated. I want to just tell one quick story that I think really told me that what we were doing made sense to people. The New York Times, if you've noticed, if you read the New York Times, they've been doing focus groups with different clusters of Americans over different issues. And around maybe this is like March or April of last year, they did one on just economic insecurity, and they focus grouped Americans who were just really on the margins, you know, like a household making like $30,000, $40,000 a year. And it was like kind of 10 people from all over the country, but one of them was a woman named Phyllis from San Diego. And they were talking, they got to like all kinds of questions, but they got to inflation. And most of the people, they were talking about like the price of chicken and of bread and just how that's gone up, and it's really been hard. But Phyllis from San Diego talked about her utility bill and just how it's literally like doubled in the last 2 years. Now, Phyllis, I'm going to imagine, doesn't have solar, you know, like it's pretty low income. She's probably a renter. But she said in her comments, she said, and now I've just heard that they're going after the people who have solar. You just can't win. And so what that meant was, for solar is not only did the statistics show that solar is something that's getting in the hands of working class people, but working class people themselves. And, you know, and that's kind of weird to even use that category because some of us here would call ourselves working class, but just working class people themselves identify with solar as something that maybe they can't get today, but something they want tomorrow. It's an aspirational thing. And that's why this fight just ran so deep. So then what happened? Like, so that you would think, okay, surely we must have, we had to win. But we didn't. We didn't lose, but we didn't win. So what the CPUC ended up doing after a long, torturous, you know, year was they didn't do a solar tax. They didn't make retroactive changes on the 1.5 million existing solar users, but they did slash that compensation that future solar users get for sharing their extra solar energy with the grid by more or less 80%. And what that's going to do is, for people who already have solar, they're protected during their grandfathering period. We can get into what that means in a moment. It's very significant that there's no solar tax for now. We can get into why that's the case. But for people who go solar after April 15th, their payback period is going to almost double from what it is right now. It's about like 6 years. It's going to go to more than 10 years. And what we know is that most people won't go solar if the payback period is much more than 6 years, for reasons that you can completely understand. We know this, and the CPUC knows this. And so unless you can get yourself a battery with that solar, most people are just not going to be able to afford getting solar for the time being. And that's the reality. Any place where changes have been made in other states that have tried to do what the CPUC did, we saw the solar market collapse in half. And so we're going to see a lot of job losses. We're going to see a lot of small local family-owned businesses go under. We're going to see adoption slow down. At a time that we need to triple it, we're going to see rooftop solar likely slow down by a lot. And that's the reality. And I don't, it's possible that we can unwind it, but I mean, just to be honest, I think that's a hard row to hoe. There's a theory that there is some people that are talking about a lawsuit. It's way too early to tell whether that's going to bear fruit. It's unlikely the legislature is just as bought as the CPUC and the governor on this thing. So I don't see the legislature reversing this. And then you could go to the ballot, and if anyone here has got, thinks we can raise $40 million to run a viable ballot measure, then we can definitely win. I'm sure of it. Like, we've tested this. Like, we could take this to the ballot and we could win, but only if we have the money to spend. And I don't know where I would find that money. And I'm not being flipped, by the way. If anyone here does have access to donors who can do like 6- and 7-figure kind of contributions, let's talk. Like, it's not off the table, but it's not quite, ready for prime time. So then what do we do? And so here, let me just do a few thoughts, and then I want to just leave a lot of time for questions. And I think we can get to mostly all the things through questions, but I want to just give a few thoughts. So first off, it is incredibly significant that we stop the solar tax. And here's why. The future that we're trying to get towards, the future where the utilities, it's game over. Like, and by the way, we need the utilities. And actually, let me use this. Let me try to illustrate this by addressing the thing that Diana said right in the very beginning. So one of the things that the utilities said all throughout this whole thing, and the CPUC kept repeating, is that rooftop solar needs to be dialed back because it's responsible for rising electricity bills. Essentially, rooftop solar users are freeloaders. They're not paying their fair share of the grid while they're still using the grid, and thus all these costs, and they're increasingly just not paying for the grid. And so then people who don't have solar have to pay for it. That was essentially sort of a tragedy of the commons kind of argument. It's absolute bunk. It's nonsense. The opposite is true. One of the most detailed energy modeling that was done over the course of the last 2 years looked at 2 scenarios. One where the state hits its clean energy goals with just large-scale renewables like solar farms and wind farms, and one scenario where the state tries to hit its clean energy goals with large-scale solar and wind, but also with lots and lots of rooftop solar and batteries. And it was the second scenario that was $120 billion cheaper than the first scenario. And the main reason why is that the more that you have lots of rooftop solar and batteries locally, then the less need you have for long-distance power lines and other infrastructure that's actually the thing that's driving up electricity bills. So in fact, rooftop solar saves everybody money, whether or not they have solar. But you would never get that from the CPUC because the modeling that they did, in energy modeling, if anyone here does energy modeling or just any kind of modeling, it's devilishly tricky. And little assumptions that you bake into your model can cause very, very different outcomes. And one of the things that the CPUC's modeling did was they just grossly undercounted the degree to which rooftop solar reduces the cost of long distance power lines. And it's not surprising because the consultant that the CPUC used to do all of their modeling, all of their other clients are the utilities, not just the utilities in California, but all the utilities nationwide. So there was a massive conflict of interest at the heart of the CPUC's numbers. The reason why I'm saying this is because the future that we want is that future, one where you've got lots of large-scale renewable energy, but you also have lots and lots and lots of rooftop solar and batteries. And the reason why a battery is really, really important is because then you don't really need the grid that much. It doesn't mean you go off grid, but what it means is that when you make extra solar energy, instead of it flowing back into the grid, it's flowing into a battery. And then when the sun goes down, then the energy just flows back into your house. And if you have extra during peak times and you're willing to share it, then you could share it with the grid, and that can help to really, prevent blackouts and other kinds of things. That's the future that we're trying to go for, is one where you have millions and millions of solar rooftops, and a good chunk of them are paired with a battery. And the technology is there. Obviously, we can't scale that up overnight. There's massive supply chain issues, and batteries are just too expensive right now for most people. But we're getting there. And if the state was really, really serious about its clean energy goals and its economic equity goals and that kind of thing, we would be trying to figure out how to just supercharge not just rooftop solar, but also battery adoption. So the reason why, now let me kind of take it back to why it's really significant that we avoided the solar tax. The utilities know that that's where we're going. They know that. They see the future isn't just rooftop solar, but it's solar and a battery. And once you have that, then you have millions and millions of people that actually don't really need the grid anymore. And then it's not, again, that the grid goes away, and it's not that the utilities become obsolete. They actually have a really important role in this whole thing. But it means that their 150 years of just absolute dominance, complete dependence, the population being completely dependent on them, it's over. And it's a different ballgame. They're still profitable, they're still viable, but they're not the dominant. They don't dominate. And the reason why they really wanted that solar tax was because it meant that no matter what you do, whether you have solar and a battery or whatever, you can't escape. You're going to pay no matter what. And the more solar energy you make, the more you're going to pay us. And we stopped that. And we're going to have to keep stopping that. But I think one thing became very clear over the course of the campaign is we made the solar tax politically toxic. Like, Governor Newsom is not a friend of rooftop solar, but it was obvious once we got down the home stretch that he and his political advisors were like, okay, we're going to have to give the utilities what they want, but we're not going to do the solar tax. That would be the end of his presidential ambitions. Yeah. And it's really, so we live to fight another day. Like the future that we want, one that's got like 10 million, 20 million, apartment buildings and houses and churches and all that kind of thing, powered with solar, paired with a battery, still remains viable. But what we now are in a bit of a cold winter on is you can't get there unless batteries are cheap enough, to pair with the solar, and they're just not cheap enough. And even if they were cheap enough, the supply chain just isn't there yet. There's still a lot to work out. And so what the CPUC did would have been fine if they did it in like 5 years and then had a very, very generous battery rebate and incentive program to try to drive down the cost of batteries. But it's not fine that they're doing it starting April 15th. And so we're now in a position where the rooftop solar market is going to contract in a really, really big way. Regular, everyday people are going to have a hard time getting solar after April 15th. They're just going to have a hard time affording it. It doesn't mean it's going to go away, but they're going to have a really hard time with it. And batteries just aren't really ready for prime time. And so what we need to do over the next couple of years is on the one hand, we have to do a bunch of things to just keep trying to make solar and batteries cheaper. On the one hand, like, we shouldn't give up on that. We need to educate consumers. We need to try to convince the legislature and the CPUC to be, maybe not unwinding this decision, but doing rebates for batteries, streamlining the red tape that drives up the cost of these things on the one hand. And then on the other hand, I think we need to just step up our political game. So we made a very, very good showing. And it was a massive, extraordinary show of public support, but it was not enough in the end to get everything that we wanted. And the person, Governor Newsom, is responsible for this. He is well aware of what the CPUC did. He, on the one hand, he stopped that solar tax from happening, but he let the utilities take their pound of flesh. And the legislature, I think if the vote was put to the legislature, they were in on it too. And so what that means is we created a lot of political power for rooftop solar, and it's enough to be able to hold the line. And we're going to have to keep holding the line and trying to make like incremental gains over this kind of cold winter that we're about to go in. But if we want to really move the needle now, if we wanted to undo this decision, if we wanted to change the whole landscape, if we wanted to get the legislature in a position where they were going to do a $3 billion rebate program for batteries, for example, then we're going to have to do something different than what we're doing now. I think what we did right now is sort of like what you do with relatively little resources. But I think if we want to kind of take it to the next level, we're going to have to get involved in elections. We're probably going to have to spend, as a community of people who care about solar, something like $1 million a year, helping pro-solar candidates get elected and to kick out anti-solar legislators. And I'm not sure that the consensus is there yet in the progressive and democratic and environmental world that that's what people would want to do. So I'm just sort of riffing now, I'm kind of concluding my remarks and just going like, these would be the pathways. And it's a little unclear to me exactly what is the next step. My plan is to try to get, by the time we get around to, early to mid-February, we have a game plan that has a consensus. But I'm really, really interested in just taking people's questions now and thoughts and going from there. So that's what I got for you as my upfront presentation.
Well, that was terrific, Dave. And I think there will be lots of questions that will be coming on. Even though I have the floor first, I will defer to people that have already raised their hands, and we'll get questions to you. The first person is Mike Caggiano. Mike, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah. The item I heard was that they still have to expand the grid regardless, because with the EVs coming on, with so much more electric demand, they're going to need it either way for a period of time, for probably a good period of time, just to buttress for peak problems during those hot spells. And that is part of my understanding of the explanation, that it's not like, oh, you need less grid or more grid. It seems like you're definitely going to need more grid for the foreseeable future. If nothing else, just looking at the EV explosion that we've got going on.
Mhm.
Other item was the gas infrastructure, like the people who are getting off gas, which I just had a guy here yesterday. We were looking at the possibility, because they live in a condo, but it's a little tricky. But either way, that as that goes down, the infrastructure still has to be maintained for the evenings or for the peak power, because that will definitely be their go-to power when things do not function as they hope or during peaks. And the only people paying for gas then would be, as they were saying, the lower income people that haven't been able to switch. And that might be part of the reasoning why they're looking at trying to level the playing field as far as who's going to be pitching into the kitty to keep the infrastructure going gas, even though we'd like to see it eliminated eventually. It looks like it's a long way to go, because the retrofits, just look at my place, around 20 grand. Right now I have a perfectly functioning gas hot air heater, and most people aren't going to be able to, say, well, why would I fix something that's not broken? Like, it's extremely reliable. I don't think that one person got one in a 33 unit building. One person replaced a gas furnace recently, and it was more because of laziness. It was the landlord who said, "Oh, just go get a new one." I don't know what they ended up paying, but the tenant said, "I'm pretty sure they could be fixed. It's probably just a circuit board or something needs fixing." And it just worked out that way. And they ended up replacing probably a perfectly functioning gas hot water, a gas heater, I should say. And I'll drop it there, because you probably got plenty of other questions. I might come back later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to reiterate just something is rooftop solar and batteries, regardless of who has them. I mean, I think I'm making the case that it's increasingly, until the CPUC made their decision, it actually is getting in the hands of people you would not expect to get it. But the point is that when there's been the most detailed modeling, a scenario that has lots of large scale renewables and lots of rooftop solar and batteries is $120 billion cheaper for the grid than one where you just have large scale renewables. So the point is that this whole idea that when people go and make their own energy and store it, it increases the cost of the grid for the people that don't have that. That's actually not the case. It's the biggest cost of the grid is the infrastructure. And we're going, as you said, we're going to need a lot of infrastructure over the next 15, 20 years, no matter what. But what rooftop solar and batteries does, it means we need a lot less of it, and $120 billion less of it, which ends up being $300 per ratepayer per year. And so even if let's just do a complete extreme example, that going forward, the only people that get solar are upper middle class and wealthy people, everyone would still benefit. What's even better is that that's not the scenario that's realistic. The scenario that's realistic is that lots of different kinds of people can get solar and batteries. So not only does everybody benefit whether or not they have it, but then millions and millions of people can get the additional benefits of decentralized generation on top of that. So it's the tragedy of the commons, which is sort of I think the frame that the utilities were trying to get into the ether. It actually just isn't true in this particular instance, because you're literally reducing the footprint of a very expensive system and making it less expensive as a result.
So I'm going to call on the next people that have their hands raised, but I'm going to ask people to try to keep their questions short and the preface to the questions even shorter, please, so that we get lots of opportunity for Dave to respond. Bill, I think you're next. And you're muted, Bill. Bill, you're muted.
That's because somebody muted me. Well, at the risk of not providing a whole lot of context to what I want to say or the question I want to ask, I'm just going to follow Marshall's advice and be very simplistic here. To my mind, too simplistic to the point where I think I'll be misunderstood. But my question simply is, why can't solar be affordable? But more to the point, Dave, what the hell is the definition of affordable? Because what may be affordable to you is not affordable to me, is not affordable to somebody who has half the income or assets that I have. So, I mean, there lies a big part of the dilemma, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think this answer just is being answered by consumers. Like I don't have to answer that. I wouldn't want to answer it. And like you said, you wouldn't want to either. But what we've seen is like just literally the trend line, of the demographics of who's adopting solar. Like it's about it's about 150,000 new rooftop solar installations a year for the last bunch of years. And the demographics, the middle and working class demographic, right? So this would be like, $100,000 a year and less, and like and then the $50,000 a year and less bands, right? Is just consistently is getting an increasingly greater share of the adoptions every single year, and such that now the last year that we had data, the last couple of years we've had data, just under half of all new solar is going into middle and working class neighborhoods, and like I said before, the same number of households were getting solar that made under 50K a year as ones that made over 250K. And so consumers decide themselves what's affordable. But what we're seeing is just this remarkable trend where consumers who, by all definition, are middle and working class are deciding this is affordable. I can do it. And I'm getting those savings. And it's not just the stats. I mean, like I work with these people every single day. So I have a front row seat to just people who are just can't believe that they were able to, make it happen. And one reason why is that, just there's more creative financing mechanisms. The whole thing has gotten cheaper. 15 years ago, rooftop solar was like $40 a watt. Today, it's about $4 a watt. So that's one big thing. It just, that makes a difference. There's also financing options out there that we didn't have, even 10 years ago. I'm a pretty middle-class household. We lease our car. We've never bought a car ever, or at least the only car we ever bought was like, for $5,000. Now we lease, and there's things like that. And then there's things called power purchasing agreements where you don't even need to pay anything up front. The solar company still owns the panels, but you still get a value proposition that's better than just not having solar at all. So it's the consumers are doing the talking. And what we know from that data is that as long as the payback period is around 6 years for the investment, then you see the trend line go that way. As soon as you take the payback period pretty much past like 8 years, then the trend line flattens and starts to go down. And we've seen this in like numerous states that have done something similar to what the CPUC did. So what we were arguing all along was going, just look at the consumer data. Like you don't need to look at your little spreadsheets to kind of define what's affordable. Just look at actual consumer data that we've accumulated over the last 10 to 15 years here and around the country. And that'll tell you what the tipping point is that, consumers need in order to be able to make the decision to go solar. And, we argued for a people-centered policymaking. The CPUC just decided to do it a different way.
But I guess I just have to say, Dave, I mean, I'm right there in that demographic you just described. And I've looked into solar at least over the last 10 or 15 years, and it's always been a bridge too far for me. I've never had it. I never seen it where it would be a payback within 6 years. Never.
That's possible. And that's why not everybody has solar. And remember what I said at the beginning, we were just getting started. Like, I'm not trying to claim we were in the promised land before the CPUC made their thing. What I'm simply saying is 15 years ago, the only people that could get solar were rich people. And now all you have to do is just drive through a working class neighborhood in Fresno or San Diego County, and you see it all over the place. That doesn't mean that it's universal, right? There's different markets, different pockets, different situations. I'm just showing you what exists here in California. The per capita solar adoptions are highest in the most low-income counties. And again,
Right.
not universal, but just that's the trend line. And what the CPUC just did was took a trend, and instead of trying to figure out how to make it go faster, we're now going to go in the other direction.
Great. So Greg, you're up next.
Okay. One question for you first, very simple. Are you related to Art Rosenfeld, the famous Art Rosenfeld?
Nope, not at all.
Okay, but you know who he is.
I do. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Not the first time I've gotten the question.
Who did the $700 tax? Who was it going to go to? To the state or directly to the utilities?
Utilities, because remember the premise they were arguing was that solar users are not paying their fair share of the grid. So this is a way to basically
the $700 was going directly to PG&E.
Yes.
Well, I have solar, but I don't have a battery. So what do I do now?
You're okay. So let's do a little quick consumer sidebar. So the CPUC's decision affects people who go solar after April 15th.
Yeah.
For people who currently have solar, who are either on what's called NEM 1 or NEM 2, your the term that's been used is either lock-in or grandfathering, but you can stay on your current net metering program for 20 years from the date that your system turned on. So if you got solar in 2010, then you can stay on your current net metering arrangement until 2030. And then you're going to have to switch to this new program. So for most people, they've got quite a lot of time before they have to worry about this. The people who have solar who do have to worry about this are those who got solar like back in 2023, 2024. And, but that's, if you have solar right now, you're okay. Now, if you have solar right now and you want to add panels, like maybe you're thinking, shoot, I'm going to be getting an electric car. I'm going to be doing some of the things that the gentleman before was talking about. You want to electrify. If you want to add panels, if you add them after this new thing goes into effect, you're going to lose your net metering status. You're going to have to revert to what this new thing is called NEM 3. So if you're thinking about adding panels, again, I'm not in the business of selling solar and I don't like to pressure people to do anything, but if you wanted to add panels and you have solar already, you may want to get that done before the cutoff date of April 15th.
But the payback I get this with my present system changes or does not change?
No changes.
I mean, the rate that they pay me back for the difference between what I make and does not change.
Does not change. Nope.
Okay. So that I don't really have to get a battery.
Nope. And if you wanted to get a battery sometime in the future, you can without jeopardizing the compensation you get for sharing that extra energy with the grid. So you can sit on that choice or decide never to do it.
But the question that Bill asked you is very simple. He can borrow the entire sum from SunPower and pay nothing.
You can do what's called a power. Yeah, there's lots of financing options, which is why working class people are getting solar in droves.
Yeah, so Bill certainly can do it because he doesn't have to pay anything.
Right. You just have to do enough investigating to know how to locate the company that'll do it, and they're all.
But it's very simple.
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's very simple. You just have to contact the right company. Diana, you have your hand up.
Thank you, sir. So I have a comment. Thank you so much for raising, as a person who is looking into getting solar before April 15th, I was making decisions about the renting and the buying of the system. So thank you for raising the benefits of renting that system for people who are not in a position to buy them. But I want you to think seriously. We are obviously a Democratic club. We have some history of taking resolutions to the state Democratic convention. And in recent years, the convention has become more progressive than our Democratic legislators. I'll let that sit for just 1 second. And so what I would like, and I'm so sorry, Flavia is here, but I'm sorry that Ashley, our brilliant person who is, who in the past has shepherded this kind of project. But I would like to work with you to take a resolution to the resolutions committee of the state convention, because if we were successful in putting it on the Democratic Party platform, it would be more difficult for our legislators to ignore it. And you have raised some really interesting points that I think need to be, put in front of them.
That's a great idea. I would love to
question.
talk with you more
I
about
don't
how to
think
do
I
that.
have any questions. And so the other thing was that many of us belong to other networks. And so I'm afraid I didn't look at your website as thoroughly as I should have, but I'm wondering if you have an endorsements page where individuals and organizations can support the work that you're doing, because I think there's more power in adding other organizations to this effort. So that also might be something that could be considered.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
can't come up with
Great,
a
great.
question, sorry. You did a
Yeah.
brilliant presentation. I should say that. Thank you so much.
Let's definitely chat offline about your idea, because I think that's actually really, really key. And I think there would be a lot of interest in other kind of like democratically oriented clubs around the state for that. And then I just put in the chat for to give you a sense of things, the list of organizations that were a part of the Save California Solar Coalition, the 600 that I was mentioning. And we intend to keep that coalition together, going forward. I mean, we have a lot of work to do to just kind of like unpack what happened, figure out what the heck to do next, turn it into like a real campaign. But I don't see any reason why people are mad and they want to do something. And there's a lot of reason why we need to keep fighting for this thing. And I think your idea is one of several that we ought to be taking forward.
And we
we can help you grow that.
We mustn't lose sight of the fact that the main reason we have to do it is because of climate crisis. It's, we've got to get off of fossil fuels. So Nancy and Jim Crampton, have your hands up. And you're muted. You're still muted. Yeah. There you go.
Okay. We live in a condo, and the legislature passed bills to make it a little easier for people in a condo to do solar panels, but it's almost impossible. That legislation was passed 2 years ago. We live in a condo with a lot of people who have electric cars, and no one yet has tried to get solar power installed. If you want, in our building, there's 16 units in our building, you have to map the roof so that everybody has an equal chance to get enough power to do it. And then if I put in one kind of solar panels and Joe puts in another kind of solar panels and Sam puts in another, I mean, it's a mess.
Yeah.
Whereas low income housing gets to have solar panels put in, and they get the share of the solar power that's generated based on the size of their unit. Why can't something like that be done to condos that have huge roofs?
Yeah, good question. I have no good answer for you. Like, this is the kind of stuff that would be a simple solution if there was real leadership, both at the state and local level.
I think we wrote
Where-
a letter too.
And one thing that it makes me think is if there's a critical mass of people in your condo who share your interest in getting solar, and there's just technical stuff, I just wonder if there isn't some local organizing that you guys could do to make that work. But I'm happy to talk offline. Let's put it that way. But I may not have a very good answer. You're just raising like, this is why the situation, instead of what the CPUC did, I could list 20 things that the governor and the legislature and the mayor and whatever should be doing right now to just supercharge and make this more accessible. And what you're listing is just one of the
comment to
obstacles.
you that we wrote a letter on behalf of our organization to Senator Josh Becker addressing this issue specifically probably 6 months ago, and have had zero response. Very disappointing.
But there are a lot of condos and apartment buildings, and that could have, and I think part of the real push has to be getting the maybe the rebates and things you do get like that are going to help you onto the batteries, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're producing solar power at a time of day when nobody uses it, and you can't, and you haven't saved it up to do it at night, and that's when we need to do it. But maybe there's something that can be tied in, and I don't know how we go about doing it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, all these things, you're right. I wonder if there's a way. We should, contact me offline if you're interested
Okay.
in talking more. I don't know, but I'm always I'm a community organizer, so I'm always kind of like, ooh, local
Good.
problem. How do we solve it? So,
Okay, good.
I
You may
don't
have
know.
some good ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, who knows?
Well, it sounds like a lot of these questions have to do with getting together with influential politicians as well, because ultimately many of these are going to be have to unravel some of the legislation that's being blocked. So Flavia and Carrie, you have your hands up.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to ask two quick questions. Because of climate change, we need to use more electric cars than fossil fuel cars. So this whole decision from the CPUC, not only is it de-incentivizing solar panels from getting installed, it's going to de-incentivize people from deciding to get electric cars or more building electrification, which is the way we need to go. The second question is, and that's my question, is how is that justifiable? And then the second question is, you mentioned that the analysis that was done was kind of biased by the CPUC. Is there any chance that we can challenge their analysis and conclusions by calling out their flaws in their analysis?
Man, I wish I could say yes to either of those two things. I always try not to be a Debbie Downer, but I also like to be real with people, and like I said, I think I've hopefully been really clear. There is a path forward, and there's going to be lots that we're going to be doing this year, but I also want to just give really clear answers about just where we are. So on your first point, yeah, I mean, again, the rationale was that rooftop solar users were not paying their fair share, and so they needed to be cut down a peg. And they were literally using electrification as the rationale. They were going, oh my God, we need to get people to electrify, but nobody's going to electrify because rates are too high. Rooftop solar is responsible for rates being too high, so we need to cut down rooftop solar so rates will go down. That was the rationale. But it's kind of like, oh, really? Rates are going to go down now that you've cut rooftop solar? Okie dokie. And so it's just like the most gigantic lie that ever got foisted, which, by the way, most of the public didn't buy. I mean, like, we were consistently polling to just kind of see, do people buy the argument? And they weren't. The only people that bought the argument en masse were the political insiders in Sacramento. It was the bubble, so it was a complete fix by elitists, on this thing. And you're right. I mean, like, I would have never have thought that we would be driving an electric car right now. But when we got solar, then I was like, oh my God, we can get an electric car now. Like, it so made sense. So it was like a gateway drug to electrification for us. And there's a lot of evidence that people will go and electrify after they get the solar. It's a bit of a, just that's what it is. So I don't know. I do think that not only is this going to stall rooftop solar, but it is going to stall out a lot of the electrification stuff. But again, I don't want to be totally pessimistic, but just, I think that's the consequence. So that's on the first thing. And then on the, sorry, your question was, oh yeah, the conflicts of interest. I mean, it's perfectly legal what they did. One of the things that's on my wish list is to pass a CPUC anti-corruption law that would be very, very simple. I mean, there's a lot of things you could do to reform the CPUC, but I think there's two very simple things that are just common sense. One would be they're not allowed to hire any consultant to do any work for them if that consultant has ever done business with utilities in California or anywhere around the country in the last 20 years. I think that's like really, really simple, because the consultant they hired to do their math, I mean, they're literally on the payroll of every North American utility. So that should just be illegal. Like, that's just such a conflict of interest. It just blows my mind. So that should just be, we should just make that a law. Then the other thing we ought to prohibit is people who have ever worked for the utility in the last 15 years can't go and be an employee or a commissioner of the CPUC, and vice versa. Anyone who has ever been an employee or a commissioner of the CPUC cannot go and work for any of the entities that they once regulated, whether they're, and that includes solar companies, by the way, because right now there's this like awful revolving door. PG&E's lead lobbyist, the person that was lobbying the CPUC to kill rooftop solar on behalf of PG&E, it was Carla Peterman, who just 2 years ago was a CPUC commissioner. So that should just be illegal. In New York, there's a lifetime revolving door ban. So these are things that I want to put on the agenda. I don't, and again, we're just coming out of this fight. We're still kind of like, I'm a little punch drunk. I'm part of like what we want to do over the next month is just kind of like these conversations, but that seems like that should just go on the agenda and use it as both a way to highlight just how corrupt this whole decision was, but also we could make some changes that could avoid this kind of nonsense in the future.
Great. Let's see, we still have people with hands up. And I'm sure they're going to keep their questions short. Greg?
Yes. I don't understand it. I don't think you explained it completely. The CPUC, okay, is corrupt, but the companies like PG&E, they don't make their own power. So what's their interest in lying? I mean, just to get more money in the future from the people who put on solar. Why were they interested in lying and falsifying their data?
Long distance power lines. So you're correct. And so just for people who don't know, utilities don't make their profit on the electricity that they sell you. They used to, but not for a long time.
Right.
What they make their profit on is the infrastructure that connects the electricity to the user. And mainly that's long distance power lines, the distribution and transmission system, T&D is what they call it. And the business model, and this is what's been set up, is for every dollar that they spend building and maintaining long distance power lines, they get to tack on. And by the way, you pay for all that, right? So anytime they spend $1 building and maintaining, that gets charged out to the ratepayers. And in addition, the CPUC lets them tack on a 7 to 12% profit on top of that, guaranteed. So this is called the Avery-Jergis effect. And what it is it's essentially they're incentivized to engage in a set of activities that drive up everybody's rates. And so it's a built-in incentive. But remember what I said earlier. So back to your question about rooftop solar. Rooftop solar reduces the need to have to spend as much building and maintaining long-distance power lines. So the utilities are looking into the future when not just is there going to be a lot of solar, but there's a lot of solar paired with batteries. Again, I'm looking into the future. They're looking into the future and going like, shoot, they've seen these same studies that go that we're going to like literally be spending hundreds, certainly tens of billions and possibly hundreds of billions of dollars less than right now they could be spending on long distance power lines. And that's a lot of money that's off the table. They're just, I mean, it is really like, you might disagree with this, but just, I think they really are that greedy, because a future with lots of rooftop solar and batteries still means a future with lots of long distance power lines that they can profit from. It's just not as much as they would if they didn't have rooftop solar. And their whole goal, they're hardwired to maximize their profit. And if they can take off the table or slow down a disruption that reduces their profit center in some way, then that's more profit for them and their shareholders. And that's really what this whole thing is all about.
And the governor is in cahoots with that idea?
Yes. And so here's the underlying thing going on. So the governor, he doesn't make the decision and he doesn't veto the decision, but every governor in California in the history of the CPUC is always involved in CPUC decision. Everyone in Sacramento politics knows this. This governor was absolutely involved behind the scenes in the CPUC decision. And the political dynamic there was this governor has a long history with PG&E, but it's more than that. And so let me just get under the hood a little bit of the politics here. PG&E's labor union is contractually, their labor union, remember, this is a democratic state and labor unions are very powerful in democratic politics. And PG&E's labor union is one of the most powerful labor unions in democratic politics. It's IBW 1245. PG&E's labor union, if you look at their collective bargaining agreement with PG&E, page 7, there's a clause that's called competitive challenges. And that clause says that the union is obligated to defend PG&E's business model against any competitive challenges. That's literally the language. And the IBEW 1245 has taken that very, very seriously. Their lead lobbyist does PG&E's work in the legislature. So even though PG&E themselves is persona non grata because of Paradise and all these kinds of things, the union is not. And that union worked very, very hard to defend Governor Newsom in the recall. And if you look at Governor Newsom's victory speech that he gave the night of the recall when he succeeded in defending himself, it was at an IBEW union hall. And they gave him $1.5 million alone for the recall. And it's payback time. And so Newsom, to his credit, stopped the solar tax. He defended existing solar users, but his hand is on the decision to screw the millions of people who don't have solar yet. And that's just the truth. And, you know, I know I'm talking to a crowd that, you know, many people probably supported him, and I'm not saying don't support him. I'm just saying this is on his hands. He was absolutely involved with it.
Very sad to hear.
Okay, so that's very informative, but you're talking to a group that probably understands a lot of what you just said. Mike, you have your hand up again, and then after that, Nancy.
Yeah, I was just curious when you're saying that they are PG&E and the rest of the PUC is committed to phasing out fossil fuels. How would that comport with their behavior generally? I mean, if they're trying to knock down a lot of the solar infrastructure that's supposed to be coming online, what is their response? Yeah, how are they supposed to accomplish where they want to go if they're you know, just centralized solar is the only thing they're into? I'm kind of curious on that. And the other item, what are other countries doing? Why do we always have to be the ones to reinvent the wheel? What is Australia doing? What is Norway doing? What is Germany doing? I mean, just curious. But a lot of other countries have the same problems we have.
Right.
You know, what's going on in the world?
Yeah. So the CPUC talks out of both sides of their mouth on this thing. On the one hand, you will hear them say over and over again, large scale renewable energy is the way to go. They'll say it's cheaper, large scale renewable energy. They'll say, oh, utilities can get, you know, power from a solar plant for 5 cents a kilowatt hour, but we have to pay these solar users 30 cents a kilowatt hour for their energy. What they forget is it's 5 cents if at the point that the energy is generated in the desert, but it becomes 30 cents because it has to travel over those long distance power lines. And, you know, CPUC is filled with smart people who know that, but that's, you know, so they'll argue that they can get there with large scale. But then the other side of their mouth, if you were listening to their defense of their decision, they would say, don't worry, this isn't going to cause rooftop solar to collapse. We're actually going to make it easier for people to get solar. And so they just, I'm trying to kind of, I know you're intelligent people and I don't want to just feed you a line, you know, but I was listening to them and it just felt like it was right out of 1984. And it's just, I think it's just out of 1984, like just up is down and down is up and whatever other things are in that book that I'm forgetting about, you know, and that's our CPUC. And by the way, remember, they're not elected officials, so it's not like they're paid off. It's just, it's a captured agency. You know, a lot has been written about a captured agency. There's staff, there's a revolving door, there's a bubble. Some of them are good people, but the only way that they can look at the world is through the lens of PG&E's business model. And what's good for PG&E's business model is good for the state. So they think they're doing good things. And we're out here kind of going like, PG&E's business model is awful. Like, what are we talking about here? And so there's just an incredible disconnect. And then, of course, it doesn't help that Governor Newsom, you know, owes PG&E's union big, and such is just the nature of the politics.
Okay, so we have Jim and Nancy Crampton, and then I will, and I think we'll probably end after that. So Nancy, Jim, you have another question?
Hi, this is the other half of the Cramptons. This is Jim. And I have a question. We live in a community of mostly high-tech people, probably half of them driving Teslas. If I were one of them and bringing my Tesla home at night, and I go plug it in to my electric connection and I charge it, where is that incremental power coming from?
Yeah.
Is it coming from solar generated power, or is it coming from incremental power, typically from non-renewable sources?
Well, today, if you're plugging, let's say you don't have solar and you're bringing your electric car home and you're plugging it in, it's coming from the grid. And,
At night.
it's hard to see at night. It's hard to say exactly what's happening at what time of day and blah, 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 blah. But, 50 to 60% of the electricity that's coming from the grid today is coming from natural gas or nuclear. So, and 40 to 50% is renewables. And we have to basically take that up to 100% if California wants to hit those goals. Now, the future that we're trying to drive towards is to encourage people, we should make it easy for people to have solar, have a battery. And so that when you pull from the grid in the evening, you're not, or when you need electricity in the evening, you're pulling from your battery, not from the grid.
Yeah.
And then you charge that car, after like 8 p.m. Like you plug it in, but it doesn't start charging until after that peak time. And then maybe you're then either using energy from your battery or you're using energy from the grid, but it's during that non-peak time. This would be the intelligent way to do it. And like Bill said, not everybody is going to get solar, but you don't need everybody to get solar to make this work. What you need is just a critical mass of every community to have solar, 30%, 40% to have solar in a battery. And then there'll be lots of, just even if every battery, every user was willing to contractually give up 10% of their battery every evening, right? When you have a critical mass, that's a lot of energy that can then deal with the peak time, which means we don't have to fire up those natural gas plants, which means we can get off fossil fuels more quickly. And in the inner cities where those natural gas plants live, children can breathe cleaner air, blah, 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 blah. So, that's the scenario that we want is that.
I appreciate that answer, because many of the people I talk to who drive their Teslas in, and I talk to them about this issue, automatically assume that their car is powered by clean energy, and they don't quite understand when I say not necessarily. I appreciate your efforts, but you could put a battery in and go one step further. Thank you.
Well, as Diana pointed out in her chat comment, in San Mateo County, we're either 100% or close to 100% of renewable energy in San Mateo County. That's not true everywhere in California, but in San Mateo County, we are all renewable right now. We're told. So my question basically is, I had a whole series of questions and you've pretty much addressed all of them. One of them was one question that we haven't talked about, which I suspect is similar to your reasoning about why the CPUC passed NEM 3 and why the governor took the position that he did, has to probably similar to Prop 30, was it? That just the governor was opposed to. That was really a terrific proposition to pay for solar, renewables, and all that in the last election. Why did that go down to defeat, and why did the governor come out against it?
I don't quite understand why, actually. I don't, because it was weird. Like PG&E's union was for it, and governor was against it. So you can't explain the union politics for that. It could have been maybe like his wealthier donors from Silicon Valley didn't like it. So politicians are always kind of like, okay, I'll do a favor for you today, so I don't have to do a favor for you tomorrow. So maybe it was that. Maybe he was just trying to kind of seem a little more like, see, I'm not always Mr. Crunchy. Like, I don't know. Maybe he just believed in his heart of heart it was bad policy. We've been, in our little campaign camp, we were debating that all along, like what's going on there. And is there an insight that we can glean there that we could use for the rooftop solar campaign? And we never figured it out. If you could figure it out, let me know, because it still remains a mystery to me.
Yeah, maybe it has to do with a policy thing where we don't want policy to be made by referendums or something. I don't know. or that could be an excuse. Okay,
Yeah.
So Marshall, I really need to ask for a serious time check here.
yeah, I was just about to say the time, you know, we've already, that's been an hour for Dave. And I think unless, Mike, your question can take about 10 seconds, we're going to call this to an end, and that will be it. But you're muted. You're muted, Mike.
Sorry. Yeah, PCE, I should say, we got a free audit of our building's capacity to put additional electrical stuff in. I'm talking, this is more for the condo ladies, Nancy and her husband. And it turns out we could put in 110 volt chargers for 24 outlets. They call smart outlets. So not everyone would have their own, but you'd be within 15 feet of one. So technically every EV has about a 20-foot cord, and they recommend the maximum distance from the charging would be 15 feet, and that should work. And but I doubt it's going to be voted in, because everybody would have to pay about $1,300 over, and you could amortize it over a couple of years. But the fact remains, we have the only EV in the building. That's why I just went to see what I could learn, and that was basically it. But again, EVs are another big item to help the climate change issues long term. So I don't know where, like you say, these cross
Mike,
purposes.
I don't want to stop you. What's your question?
Well, that was basically it. That I'm just saying, if he knows more about that, fine. But it was more of a statement. Sorry.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we have gotten a lot of education tonight, a lot of information. Many of us either have solar or about to have it installed and electrifying. So, but just so you know, Dave, we're a very active political club, and we talk to a lot of local and state politicians about all these issues. And I know we're going to be talking to them more about this for sure. So I on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you so much for being able to give us so much a great talk and great information.
Thank you for everything that you guys have done and will
great.
continue to do. And this is just great. This is so nice to do this. One of the first things to do after the new year. It's great.
Thanks for being with us.
Now, and I just like to let everybody know, don't go away, don't change your channel, because we have other things to do. For example, as you know, this is the in January, we always have our task force signups, and we want to go through each of the task forces and have them let people know what their task force is going to do, has done, and who's going to volunteer to chair them. So before we go into that, Diana or others, is there something else I'm missing we need to cover before that?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I was just trying to stay on top of our time. Let's see, what is Casey? Oh, okay. Thank you, Casey, for that. Yeah, let's just go to the task force reports, and Marshall is going to lead that, right?
Okay, so so the task forces that we have, everybody knows, we have a climate change task force, we have the elections task force, social justice task force. Am I missing a task force? I don't think so. Those are the ones, and unless somebody has another one that they want to propose. And
is there going to be a healthcare task
Greg,
force?
Greg, if you're talking, you're muted. You're muted, Greg. You're muted, Greg.
There was the healthcare.
Oh, right, healthcare, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So so let's go through each of these and see where we go from there. I'd like to start with the Climate Change Task Force with Flavia. Is she still on? Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so basically, you know, you could probably figure out that the Climate Change Task Force has its hands full because it's now covering so many different issues. You know, solar is just one of the many issues. And as we're finding, you know, everything is becoming all connected. So more and more issues having to do with the environment are connected with social justice and vice versa. And the environmental movement has done a major course correction in the past couple of years in acknowledging that we cannot proceed with, you know, fighting climate change without addressing social justice, because we're leaving people behind, and we aren't, you know, the environmental movement as a whole is not really getting a lot of people on board because it wasn't really addressing the social justice component of it. So just for everybody that isn't acquainted with the SMC DFA website, we did form a web page as part of the SMC DFA website that has to do with climate change. So you could read in mid-year, we composed this one-page summary of what we've been working on. So you could look at that web page that's on the SMC DFA website to look at that. And in addition to those things, we've also been working on, we looked at regenerative agriculture. We looked at cryptocurrency because cryptocurrency has a huge carbon footprint. And so I was not just a little bit gleeful at the whole FTX debacle. We looked at bottle deposits that came to light. So in the state of California this year, they discovered $600 million that had been put into a slush fund. People pay a bottle deposit every time they purchase something with glass, and there's no way to redeem that cost back to the consumer because there was no real recycle stations built into the stores where these bottles were purchased from. So Governor Newsom has addressed that, and he, you know, put into place that now these bottle deposits will also include liquor bottles, you know, which is probably good. If we're going to be drinking that much, we should probably get something back for it. And then we also looked at greenhouse gases from the fashion industry. So, I mean, there's a lot to look at because climate change is part of everything. Personally, I live in Oregon, so I've been working on how much the food industry and food waste is contributing to climate change and trying to raise awareness about that. And so what we've also been, what we hope to look at in 2023 is water in a big way. And I also wanted to mention that we may be combining forces with the Social Justice Task Force because they've always been concerned about water, and you know, they've been concerned about solar rights as well. And as I said before, everything's connected. And so, you know, we've been active in trying to advocate for environmental change. We've been advocating for raising awareness and supporting each other when, you know, each of us wants to make changes in our own household or to learn more about what's going on environmentally in our different jurisdictions and cities. So you know, there's a lot there that to sink your teeth into. So 2023 will probably be an active year as far as climate change task force, and it may or may not be rolled into the social justice task force.
And Flavia is a fabulous chair.
Ah, thank you. Marshall, you're muted.
Sorry. Thanks, Flavia. A great summary of what the task force has been doing, and I agree, you've been a great leader of that. And so just a reminder, after the task force chairs have given their comments, we're going to ask for volunteers to chair and be members of task forces. So let's go on to another task force. Diana, are you going to do the social justice task force update?
I would be happy to. Let me, Gail did a great job of creating a report for us. So I'm just acknowledging that this is her work, and she had a great memory of the things that we did. So first of all, in the past year, so the Social Justice Task Force was responsible for bringing us Joaquin Jimenez, that you might recall, has a project over on the coast side. He's a newly elected, well, he's been in his office for a year, but newly elected member of the Half Moon Bay City Council. And he has a project about securing land so that farm workers can have a piece of land that they will farm themselves and reap the benefits and learn the management of, and so it's just a really exciting project, and that was a wonderful presentation that he made for us. Then we were also responsible for bringing Josh Becker, who talked about human rights issues at the state legislature and the things that he had been working on to improve the situation for many of our more vulnerable people in the state. David Bloom, as you know, one of my personal favorites, to turn food waste into alcohol, which can then be used to power our cars. And again, personal favorite. Marshall Gantz joined us and talked about social activism. And then tonight, this brilliant conversation we had with David Rosenfeld on transitioning to solar and electricity. So as Flavia said, there are so many connections between the conversations we have in social justice and the conversations that are being had with the climate task force. So we are talking about combining those two task forces. And so I'm hoping that that might be of interest to people. Our individual members lobbied legislators on healthcare for all, water and solar issues, researched the progress on bail reform, and served on county commissions on juvenile justice and on police response to mental health crises, and worked on local and national elections, writing, phoning, doing street actions, organized, supported fundraisers for progressive candidates, and attended and spoke at county meetings related to social justice, criminal justice, and the San Francisco PUC meetings on water issues. And then worked on fixing San Mateo County's project to have community oversight of the sheriff. And one of our members is the executive director of Fixin. So we were busy, but a lot of you were very busy as well. And so it wasn't just social justice members that have that long list. Many of us were working on many of these issues. And as was shared earlier, this is a very active club. And so we want to be as efficient with that activity as we can and put that activism to good use. So that's one of the conversations we will be having in that task force, is how we can be the most effective in the work that we do. And so that's my advocating for social justice. I can't speak for Gail, but I think that we are both, I'd like to believe that we're both still willing to co-chair the social justice task force. And for people who would like to join us, we would love to have you do that.
Thank you.
That's my report.
Thank you. And thank Gail and Abstentia. Let's see, do we have anybody here from the healthcare task force? Because I see Elsa isn't here. So I don't think we'll,
Mary was here. Mary was on the list. Is Mary still with us?
yes.
Mary, can you talk about healthcare?
No, I wasn't on that committee. I just
Oh,
was
sorry, I thought you were.
the whole year. I was doing political stuff. I mean,
Sorry, I
Right.
thought you were.
A lot of political stuff. Okay, then we'll go on to the elections task force. I chaired it and Bill co-chaired it with me. Needless to say, that was active last year. There seemed to be a few political election things going on last year, if I recall, like a major midterm. The task force was very active in trying to focus on the types of candidates that we thought would be the most useful to support, and on the methods that we thought would be useful to support. We participated in a number of meetings, group meetings, on our regular monthly DFA meetings with other groups and had discussions with them, the last of which was with a number of presenters that came up with a variety of methods to help candidates, not only locally, not only in California, but countrywide. So, and I'd like to think that our efforts, along with the many efforts around the state and the country, had something to do with the outcome of the midterm, which of course was expected to be a debacle for progressives and other Democrats as well. But it didn't turn out quite that way. So this coming year, we will have an elections task force. It will not be quite as involved in elections that are coming up this year, although there are a few. For example, Virginia has one next week, I think, in which there's a progressive running against some awful right-wing Republican. But anyway, so we will have it, and the task force will attempt to, I assume, we'll see what the task force decides, but we'll attempt to focus on what the major efforts we should be working on in getting ready for next year, or dealing with current issues with local representatives that we have ties with. So hopefully someone will volunteer to be the chair of that task force, and others will be members as we move along. So, having said that, do we have some, well, I have a comment. I was going to ask about the climate change task force, if we have someone that is willing to chair that. And I know that Flavia made a comment about combining that with a social justice. So I'm going to take the prerogative of saying that I do not think that would serve either effort well. I think they should be separate. Yes, there is overlap. There is definitely overlap. For example, we talked about solar for people that can't afford it and how it might impact them. But climate change issue is a serious area to focus on, and social justice is a serious issue to focus on. But they, despite the Venn diagram showing some overlap, they're really, in my opinion, need to be very distinctly separate. That's my opinion. So do we have any rebuttals, or somebody, Flavia or other, Flavia, are you willing to chair that, or is somebody
So
else?
are you offering to chair, Marshall, with your comment?
I was just making my opposition to making them one. No, I'm not.
To your question, Marshall, I would have to be drafted into doing that, because I'm gonna have a pretty full plate doing what I do up here in Oregon. So I'll just leave it at that. I can see your point about wanting to keep them separate and what the value would be of keeping them separate, but I'll just have to leave it at that.
Well, hopefully there will be, I know I will be more than happy to be a member of that committee, but I'm not volunteering at all to be a chair of it. Okay.
Are you willing to be a chair of the elections task force?
Unless somebody else is volunteering to chair it. Do we have somebody that's anxious, willing, or even slightly interested in chairing the elections task force? Well, I don't hear. So I'm willing to at least get it started. And as I said, I'm not sure what the focus is going to be, but I think the members will get together and decide what the focus is and how often
I think the focus will appear very quickly.
Okay, well, good.
And I want to support you in your separation of the two committees.
Of the climate change and the social justice.
Yes, I see the pluses, but I also see several minuses.
Okay, so Greg, are you saying you'll be a member of the elections task force?
Yes.
Anybody else? We had quite a great group. Mary raises her hand, and others. And Bill and Shirley and the Joanne and Nancy and Jim.
What about
No.
I'm sorry, you have your hand raised. I misinterpreted. Yeah. Okay.
Bill and Judy still on the Zoom meeting?
They are not on, but I hope they will be on the task force.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else volunteer for what? Okay. So let's get back to the climate change task force. I heard Flavia say she'd have to be drafted, but do we have others that would volunteer to be on the climate change task force?
I will be on the. I will volunteer if I can draft Flavia.
Exactly.
And we're with Greg.
Okay.
And totally recognizing while there's some overlap between climate change and social justice, they should be separate. There are too many broad issues in each that shouldn't be, converged together.
But there's something about Flavia that she just knows this and is too wonderful. I mean, you're just too good. We can't do without you, I don't think. I don't think the committee could do the stuff it does without her at the helm.
Sounds like a consensus here.
And we need that Oregon influence besides, so.
You have so much to contribute, Flavia.
You're just too good.
Draft you before this meeting is over. How about social justice?
Wait, I'd like to be on that committee too.
I'm sorry, who was it?
Carol.
Oh, Carol?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Terrific. On the climate task force you're talking about? Okay. Terrific. Okay. So what about social justice?
So I just want to make clear that one of the reasons we were considering combining the task forces was because I was trying to be sensitive to Flavia's request. And so I'd like to pursue that only to the extent that climate change might consider at their first meeting creating co-chairs and having specific tasks for the co-chair to have so that Flavia doesn't feel so overburdened. And so I just want to acknowledge that Flavia did not want to chair it, and we need to be sensitive to that, right? And so there needs to be a way for someone else on the task force to help with some of the whatever the tasks are that you guys can determine what those are. But that's my personal request without having asked Flavia's permission first.
Well, thanks.
So,
Thank you, Diana. Now, can we get back to the Social Justice Committee? Do we have somebody that's willing to?
so I'm going to take down Greg's hand, and I'm going to ask people to raise their hand if they would like to be on the Social Justice Committee. It meets the second Friday of every month on Zoom.
And Diana, are you going to be on that committee?
Yes, Diana and Gail will continue to be on the.
And co-chairing?
So one of the things, in order to have a task force, we need to have chairs, but we also need to have people who want to be on the committee, right? So, so let me just say that we are not going to be a task force of two. And yeah,
Well,
I'm just
Bill
letting.
Newell said he will be on the committee. And who else? Anybody else? Okay,
So
so
I will reach back to the members that we had last year and let them know that we're, that we are open to continuing this year. But yeah, I think we we just need to be sensitive to what this means to have these task forces.
and so far I have for the Social Justice Committee, Bill Newell, you, Diana, and Gail. Anybody else?
Well,
Okay,
there's a number of people that have been part of it that just aren't here tonight, Marshall.
right.
Probably
right.
And
probably
Nancy
will be part
Goodman
of
and
it.
Elsa, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I
let
will
us
circle back
know.
to them.
Wasn't Susie Ray part of it this last?
Yeah, Susie and Elsa and Nancy and
David
Johanna and Chris Rasmussen.
and David.
Right, and David's not with us tonight. That's right.
Right.
Yeah, so that's fine.
Okay, so there's a number of people for the social justice. For the elections committee, I see Greg, Bill and I'm sorry, Jim and Nancy, right?
So they had their hands up, but I don't know that they had their hands up for that. So Jim and Nancy, are you still on?
Yes, what
So
did you think?
Are you
No, the
interested in
question
being
was-
on the elections task force?
I don't think so.
Okay, that was what I was
Okay.
understanding as well.
Marshall, I'll be a part of it again this year.
Great, okay. And okay, so we have Greg, myself, I think the pages, and
Bill.
What about
and-
Joanne and Shirley?
Bill.
Yeah.
So, and I think there are several more that aren't on
And
here.
Mary.
Joanne and Shirley
And
are raising their
Mary,
hands.
And
Sure.
for the climate change task force, I have Greg, Jim and Nancy, right? Yes. Myself, Carol Cross, and there may be others as well that are not on here. Any other people?
And Flavia.
Oh, Flavia.
No, she does. Oh, she does not want to do it. Okay.
No,
You
no,
don't-
it's not that. It's not that. I was just shaking my head in acceptance, I guess. But
Oh.
the couple, I know, couple, Bill and his wife that makes such delicious cookies for the meeting, but her name escapes me now. They were on the elections task force every year.
Judy.
Bill and Judy. So
Yeah,
they're going
Bill
to be
and
on the
Judy.
elections
Oh, yeah,
task
yeah, yeah,
force.
yeah. That's what I meant, Bill and Judy.
All
Yes.
right.
Bill and Judy, are they on climate change, Marshall, or elections?
They're on elections.
Election.
Okay.
And Marshall, you got me, right? And Joanne?
Yeah,
On elections, Shirley.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Well, when the task force chairs send out their first informational notice about a meeting, if you could also include previous members and check with them to see if they still want to be on it, so that, because if they're not on this meeting right now, we obviously don't want to miss them.
What we
may
might
want to-
consider doing is just sending the list to Talk as well, because we have many people who are on Talk who are not here tonight, and just let them know that so far, these are the people who are on our task force. And if there is anyone else, actually, I could do that. I have the list. I'll do
That'd
that.
be great. Yeah.
And just say that if there's anyone else that would like to be on one of these task forces, to please let us know. So elections, could I ask you when you do meet so I could add that to the information?
Well, what we did in the past is we sent out basically a doodle kind of thing.
Oh,
And what we did last time was, I think it was the first Monday of the month, if I'm
Yeah,
not
right, right.
Yeah. And so we could leave it at that, and we'll ask, if that works, still
so the
works.
first meeting will be the first Monday at 7? At
Yes.
7 o'clock? Okay.
Yeah.
So that'd be February, right, Marshall?
Yeah.
And so climate change also? When does climate change meet?
Usually, climate change was meeting the last week of the month, and I think it tended toward
A Tuesday. It was a Tuesday.
Well, we kind of had it on Tuesdays, and I also have a standing meeting that goes from 6 to 7, so it made for a long Tuesday night that went, 6 to 7 one meeting, and then I jumped on the climate change task force. So if we could keep it in the last week of the month, but I'll ask for people's availability, because sometimes Tuesday isn't a good day for people. Maybe Thursday's better. I don't know.
So Flavia, I'm going to say that the first meeting is going to be, so does it matter whether it's 4 weeks or 5 weeks in a month? It's always the last week?
Correct.
Okay, so last week, and the first meeting is going to be on Thursday. I'm going to say that. How's that?
Okay.
And then you can have that conversation about whether they can work with Thursday. I think we need to start accommodating Flavia a little bit better. So
yeah.
Now listen, Diana. Flavia can speak up for herself. So I just wanted to remind everybody that to be a member of the task force, you have to be a paid up member of San Mateo County DFA. So anyway, that's Casey will thank me for reminding everybody.
That's right. Thank you for that.
Marshall, where are we at with the healthcare task force?
Well, we're I'm not sure because Elsa isn't here, and I didn't hear anybody volunteering to be the chair of it.
I'll check in with Elsa and find out if she's willing to chair it, and I'll ask her who her current members are.
Okay, great.
Marshall?
Yes.
As a last suggestion for you, and sometimes we have to be a little bit lighthearted, but on the elections task force, after tomorrow night, you can probably get Kevin McCarthy to join.
Oh yeah, great idea. He'll have free time.
I love the idea that if they just had 5 Democrats, we could have 5 Republicans, we could have a Democratic speaker. That's my goal.
Oh, what a thankless task that's going to be with a Republican majority.
It's not a very big majority.
It will never happen.
Well, let's see. Are there any other items that we need to bring up? Oh, Bill and the pages. I'm not sure you were here. You're muted, but we assumed, and you'll have to let us know if it's correct, that you and Marna will continue to be members of the elections task force.
You're muted.
Yeah, he's trying to get off.
Yeah, let's see, Marna was doing a lot of postcards last year. She wasn't doing too much for the rest of the committee on it. Yeah, I've been having some medical problems recently, so I've been sort of out of touch with things. So I'd like time to think about, how much I want to be involved.
Okay, well, it was great, whatever extent it would be great. And we love your research and your follow-ups when you can. Okay, let's see, who else? Any other business or comments? Well, I don't hear any, and so I would say we could adjourn the meeting a few minutes early if nobody has anything else to say.
I want to say thank you, and Marshall, you did a great job, and I thought Dave Rosenfeld was a great speaker to start off the year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, whoever got him, I don't know whether it was Gail or who.
It was Gail. Yeah, it was Gail.
Yeah, it was great. It was
Yeah.
very helpful, informative. So
Yeah,
thanks
he
a-
was.
Okay.
One of the best, very, very informative
Yeah.
Yes.
and very informed also.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
but-
It was great seeing you all tonight.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Happy
Night
New Year.
all.
Bye.